Please welcome our next speaker, Ms. Shilpa Kumar, partner at the Omidyar Network India, who will address property inclusivity in the context of climate action.
Yeah, good afternoon and thank you. And I just want to say it was lovely to start with that little video of Dr. Haq. And, such an important topic, like Gautam was saying, that it's so critical to everything that, each one of, sorry? Yeah. No, the land and housing is so critical to what each one of us individually and as a society, of course, feel about. But to have had Dr. Haq champion it, and for Pranab Da to have continued along with the rest of the ILDC team to bring us to this 8th edition, I think that's magnificent. But going back to, the ecstasy that Gautam talked about, I think, honestly, land and habitat really is what has shaped us almost as humanity over so many decades and centuries of human civilization. It actually defines how we live, both as individuals, as families, as societies. And the word household really brings to mind rest, nourishment, safety, security that every family needs and deserves. It's also the fulcrum of economic growth. It determines how we earn, how we save. It roots us and also forms the basis of our beliefs and traditions. In India, we call land, by so many different names, but in the end, property is of enormous economic, social, and symbolic relevance. Given the centrality of property, therefore, to each person's life, exactly like Gautam said, a better life cannot be imagined without having a house to live in and a place to work in with security, peace, and dignity. It's also true, exactly, Gautam, like you pointed out, that when you lack such a place, it's often tied very closely with poverty. At Omidyar Network India, we've actually believed that property as an asset, especially in the hands of low-income families, not only positively impacts them during their lifetime, but also is really a very important pathway to moving out of poverty, allowing families to escape generations of poverty and to move into a much better life. Over the last decade and a half, we have learned and we have worked with very visionary entrepreneurs in this sector, many of whom are here, and have had the privilege of supporting many different interventions and solutions. As we ourselves transition out of India, I just want to draw on some of our learnings of the past 10, 15 years to speak through 3 different lenses. Firstly, just the framework that we found positive in looking at a sector like this. Second, the 2 big global shifts that we are seeing today of urbanization and climatization, and the challenges posed by them. And thirdly, what are potential pathways at the intersection of property and climate, and how can funders support this? So last year, we actually took some time to step back and look at our work in the sector and to think of the whole sector, because it is such a complex sector, to try and define what are the various axes of work possible. And we found this framework quite useful, and I thought to begin, I'll share that. We thought of the framework along 3 lines. Firstly, the spectrum of immovable property, which actually is different depending on usages and challenges. And on the one hand, it can be housing, agricultural, commercial, common lands, forest lands, but also basis the right that you have of usage, which is formal and informal, sometimes hereditary allowances, sometimes rights of ways. The second axis was really the kind of interaction an individual has with property. The nature of property itself is complex, but the nature of interactions are also very complex. It could be things to do with succession and ownership, renting, leasing, using and transfer. It could be quality of the property, or it could be enabling structures like access to finance. And each one of these have a very different, very federated structure of operation, institutional frameworks. And navigating this is hard for the best of people, and even harder for those who probably cannot get easy access to some of this. And third, therefore, is really socioeconomic identity, because the state of property inclusivity and access varies so disproportionately across a very diverse range of people, depending on sometimes are you married, not married, which tribe are you from, which part of the country are you from. Your interaction with property can be entirely very different. So we found it as funders very useful to think about the three axes and to think about, therefore, where can work and support be most meaningful. But the other thing the Look Back report did, which after talking to very many people across the sector and experts, was really to kind of look at the 10-year journey and see what has happened. And I think the interesting part of it was that many positive changes indeed have taken place. We have had developments like the RERA Act. We've had developments like the Digital India Land Record Modernization Program, all of which have given a big positive boost to the sector. But alongside that, actually, civil society and grassroots organizations, many of whom are here, many of you who are here, the last mile access to such schemes and increased community involvement has certainly made a very big impact. I think the other thing is information, research and knowledge, building collaborative networks. We ourselves were part of something called Property Rights Research Network, which pulled together many different types of research as part of building this body of knowledge and building body of researchers. And lastly, entrepreneurs who led with technology solutions to drive not just greater adoption of digital technologies, but also maybe better innovation in terms of both affordability and viability of many different solutions. So it's fair to say that the sector has evolved from being very complex and little understood to one where, with the collective efforts, I would say, of everyone in this room, there is higher awareness by civil society, by research communities, by policymakers, and also building out of early solutions. But even as we look back and see all of this, we are currently posed with two very big and significant shifts, urbanization and climatization. I think clearly India is at an inflection point. We are largely an urban society. There is a continuous movement into cities just driven by job aspirations. And all of this is putting greater pressure on life in the city, and I think Gautam spoke extensively about that. The two sides of that coin really is, one, the entire balance of nature, environmental degradation, and density of population, which is all at the front lines of many, many climate-driven risk events. But on the other hand, as this pressure is growing, clearly, and the visuals, Gautam, you showed, clearly talked about how it really affects that 50% which lives on under 10% of the land in the city. But along with that is the other big change, which is climate risks manifesting. We are seeing this manifestation in the form of rising sea levels, extreme heat events, climate disasters, unpredictable weather. And again, it poses a risk for everyone, but particularly for those who are actually, like pointed out earlier, living in inadequate housing. That doesn't really give safety and security. I think property and land, is really the connect with both these trends in a very significant way. On the one hand, you could think about housing itself, dense housing contributing to climate change, given that 37% of global emissions are on account of housing construction. Embedded, of course, in the carbon, steel that is used both to build as well as for operational cooling, etc. of buildings. But really, when you kind of go out and look at informal housing, this actually is exacerbated to a very high degree and really putting at risk people to each of the events we spoke about. Climate change-related disasters then naturally become a point of displacement for people, pushing people out of homes, alongside, of course, facing all of the risks that we talked about. And therefore, when I come to the real crux of this discussion, which ILDC asked me to speak a little bit about, should it be climatization or communitization? I think that answer is a foregone conclusion. Because property itself is such a physical issue, it's such a complex issue, and yet we have climate change, which is already, in a sense, upon us. We need, at this point, to look at solutions at scale, which can also be deployed very fast. But by its very nature, I mean, unlike, let's say, what we've done in education or finance, where you can very quickly reduce a lot of things with technology, between an institution and an individual, you cannot do that for land. You cannot do that for housing. Place and habitat needs a broader conceptualization. It has to take into account not just individual need, but needs to be looked at in the context of the village, town, or city structure. We need to think about adequacy, like discussed earlier, with services, sanitation, water, waste management. All of this needs a very much broader approach than we take for some of the other challenges that we are faced with. And also needs maybe iterative, responsive kind of solutions to work with. In this, actually, the community is the most important. You cannot have solutions which don't take into account feedback from the community, try something and then see if it works, and if not, then try something else again. And therefore, to my mind, it's not even an argument. In climatization, we will need communitization at its very best. But there's an additional aspect. We can't just stop there, because successful interventions in this sector are going to need many, many different things. It's going to need data. It's going to need understanding of land use patterns. It needs understanding of specific challenges in different areas. It needs all kinds of help and experiments with data, technology, and partners of all kinds, not just urban local bodies or village governance units, but it needs engineering and social colleges. It needs startups, nonprofits, everyone to be in it. Innovation will be needed, and then, of course, the broader structures that define land and housing. And therefore, to my mind, climatization needs not just communitization, but also a lot of collaboration. Because we need solutions which will be taken and then scaled up really fast across different geographies and different types of problem situations. The question will become, where does this funding come from? And philanthropic communities will be necessary, especially to experiment and to provide incubatory capital. I mean, that's one of the things we found in our 10-year experience over here, is allowing capital that can fail is probably the biggest use of philanthropic capital. And it's something we need to focus on to develop not just foreign philanthropic capital, but also Indian philanthropic capital. The second is CSR capital. I think there's a very good way to utilize CSR capital in this whole thing, because when you have a successful solution on the back of experimentation, CSR capital is excellent at helping support scaling up of solutions. And this has become a very, very large pool, and I'd urge everyone to look at this pool to try and tap into for the land and housing sector. Of course, when you have something at scale, it's then much easier to persuade governments to come in to replicate ideas that have worked. I just want to end with an illustration of something we've recently supported, more to give an idea for food for thought. With IIT Mumbai, we've partnered on a project to build research-based solutions for land and housing for coastal cities which are most vulnerable to climate change. As populations are rising, these cities are not just facing environmental burdens, but also challenges of sanitation, wastewater discharge into their own waterways. The project here, the idea is to really identify gaps and to build solutions in the form of what we would call a living lab. A living lab at Alapi and Gandhidham in Gujarat is proposed. The idea being really co-creating solutions with the local community and involving very strong local CSO partners, local governments, and even academic institutions. The whole idea of the lab is really to be a place of experiment and co-create solutions. The idea in terms of actually then speedily taking it up into a much larger space is that if we find solutions that work, how can they be replicated and disseminated even through IIT Mumbai's own curriculum, allowing actually many more people to instantly understand the process that has worked over here. Similarly, the second project I just want to touch base upon, I think Womanity was here. A lot of you may have attended the session earlier. But our partnership with them was, again, really from the point of view of one of the most critical and yet under-included population, which is rural women, who own very little land, but who form bulk of the workforce. And I think the very idea that someone like Womanity can go out with philanthropic capital and build bases of NGOs who can in turn really spread what it takes to get more land rights and better land usage into deeper communities is really what Womanity did. So I think both these are kind of helpful ways of thinking about different types of capital, different types of projects, to go back and look at which are the problems and which are the, in a sense, personas, which are the communities who are needing help the most, and going into that. I think for something as physically segregated as land, in conclusion, I think tech is a great enabler. Policy and rule-making can help set the envelope, but in the end, it will be communities that drive change. However, I again want to emphasize that beyond communities, what we need is collaboration across very many different types of actors in this space. And I think the beautiful thing about ILDC is really it brings all of us together, whether it's funders or researchers or workers or just lifelong learners about land and housing. I think just to end, there's a very beautiful verse in what I think as one of the greatest books on philosophy of human life, which is our Bhagavad Gita. And a verse there really, says, Annad bhavanti bhutani, parjanyad anna sambhava, yajnat bhavati parjanya, yajna karma samudbhavam. Very loosely translated in my interpretation, it means that food sustains all living things. Food is made possible by rain, but rain is ultimately a product of our actions, especially when our actions are driven by concern for others and for everything on the planet. I think the verse beautifully summarizes the circularity and connect between what sustains us and what we sustain. In the end, it's about the harmony of life between humanity, land, air, water, that all of us share on this planet. Thank you, and all the best to ILDC.